we're going to do a bit of an exercise. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you do jumping jacks or anything. It's not a physical one. If you can get a piece of paper, or if you don't have a piece of paper, if you can grab your phones, and we're just going to write something down. So, last couple of weeks, or this year, we've been talking at Alive Church about the harvest. I just want you guys to write down, what are some areas of your life that you are praying for a harvest this year? We all have prayer requests, things that we want to see happen in our life, and we've been interceding, we've been praying. So if you've got some of those things, if you want to write that down in your phones or paper or whatever it is that you've been praying for. Now, some of that might be physical, it might be spiritual, it might be emotional, it might be relational. For some of you, it might look like, getting deeper in the Word. For some of us, it might look like getting fit. Some of us, it might be, strong marriage, success in our business. Whatever it is, what you've been praying for, what things you've been praying for a harvest in your life. So we've got all jotted that down. And now, okay, everybody's still writing. Wow, we've got lots of things we've been praying for. That's amazing. How many pages are we going to take, right? I know, for the kids it might be good grades at school. It might be, I don't know, whatever it is. So given that we've nearly finished writing, or we're all still writing, keep going. What now I want you to do is, I want you to take a look at what you have written down. And you've got to be honest. You don't need to share it out loud. And have a look and see, are these some of the very areas in your life that you lack discipline? Right? Some of these things are not, because you're waiting for God's timing and you're praying for that. But there are some things that, don't quite happen in our life because of the lack of discipline. We've been looking at harvest. Harvest does not respond to desire. Harvest responds to discipline. So this morning I've titled my sermon, Discipline Over Desire. Right? We are all people who love good things. I don't think anybody here who's ever prayed, Lord, make me sick, let me remain in the poverty or whatever financial situation I'm in. I don't think we've ever prayed that, right? We've all prayed for good things. So it's not that like we don't desire good things. We've all got good desires and we all desire good things. But often what happens is, we just don't have the discipline to get there. Now think about it, from the aspect of a farmer. And I think about a farmer who goes out every day in the morning. He opens his door, gets out, looks at his field and says, Lord, I pray for a massive harvest. Then he goes back in, shuts the door, sits on a couch, binges on TV, on Netflix or whatever, and Uber Eats. If he just pause, not yet, but we'll get there. So think about that person. Do you think he's going to see a harvest? The desire is there, the prayer is there, but the discipline isn't there. Now you can put that slide up. Our farmer, he wakes up early in the morning. Regardless if those blankets are really calling him, he still has to get up, get out of bed, right? He has to prepare his field. That's not easy. Some days it's a really hot day, and we've had some hot days. We've had some rainy days. He has to sow the seeds, right? There's a delicate process that goes in it. Now, these are things that needs and requires discipline. A farmer who just, sows when he feels like it, or, waters his plants when he feels like it, or when he's not busy, is not going to see a harvest. So this morning, that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at discipline for a harvest. So, many a times, actually, there's a research that was done, and I think many of us have even shared this research here from Strava, where it talks about 80% of the New Year's resolutions fail by the second week of February. We're in the third month already. Now, some of us may have done that, right? Written New Year's resolutions, January 1st. How are we going, right? We're in the third month. Yeah, I can see some looks where that's giving me the looks were saying we're not quite there. And that's okay, right? Things do happen in our lives. And the other thing was they found that 20% of small businesses, they fail in 1 year. And 50% fail in 5 years because of the lack of discipline. So, there's things we can learn from the farmer here. So we're going to look at a passage from the Bible that talks about the discipline that we need in our life for a harvest. Now, change the imagery from a farmer to an athlete, right? Come along with me in this journey. We're going to read from 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 24 to 27. I've got this from the NLT version, so it might look a little bit different. So don't you realize that in a race, everyone runs, but only one person gets the prize? So run to win. All athletes are disciplined in their training. They do it to win a prize that will fade away, but we do it for an eternal prize. So I run with purpose in every step. I am not shadow boxing. I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should. Otherwise, I fear that after preaching to others, I myself might be disqualified. Now, just to give you a bit of context, Paul writes this to the Corinthians. Now, in Paul's time, sports was big. It still is, I think, I'm not a very sporty person. But sports was big. They had the Olympics and they had the Isthmian Games, which happened near Corinth. So when he is writing this, he has context, right? He's looking at this and what happens around him. I know if you've been in Connect, a lot of the things, there's context to it. When we've been learning from the armor of God and how, Paul was in prison and he might have been seeing a Roman soldier when he wrote that. Similarly, in this passage here, it was at the time of the games and he is looking at an athlete. Now, in those times, training was huge. So for a person to qualify for these games, they had to go through 10 months of intense training, and it was strict training, only water, no junk food. They have a strict diet. They have to exercise. They have to follow a regime. If they didn't follow any of that, they get disqualified. So when he talks about disqualification in that verse, he has context to it. Now, Paul talks about how disciplined an athlete is to gain the goal that he's trying to achieve there. Now, before I go into a bit more detail, I just want to explain the word discipline, right? Discipline has lots of different meanings, and I'm going to say which context I'm going in today. So discipline, we can talk about discipline in the context of, a field, a particular study, like, the discipline of nursing. Like we often, at university, we refer to ourselves as the discipline of nursing, discipline of sociology, or whatever it is. So there's the discipline, which is a study. Then there's the discipline that is training or for improving oneself, which is what I'll be looking at today. Then there's also the discipline that comes, the practice of training people through punishment or undesired consequences. Now, did you know in the Bible, a lot of the time, the time when discipline is mentioned with regards to children or whatever, the Greek word they've used is paideia, which means training or education or instruction. So bringing up the children and so on. Now, this particular verse here, when Paul talks about, he uses the Greek word hypopiazo, which means it's a severe type of training that one undertakes for self-discipline. So it's like, in that context, it was striking their eye, beating into, submission, and bringing their body under control to achieve their goal. So for this morning, for our the passage that we're looking at, discipline can be defined as choosing what you want most over what you want now. Now, just think about that for a minute, right? We all have lots of things that we desire for, right? And if we look at it from a context, like I want to get really deep in the Word. I want to have a consistent prayer habit. But at the moment, I really like crawling back into bed and going to sleep instead of reading, right? But what do I want? I know what I want. I want most to get deeper into the Word. I know what I want. But now, I don't feel like it. This is what we're battling with every day, right? If we just look at our lives and look at, the things that we go through every day, there's lots of things. We know what the right thing is, and we don't need anybody to tell us that. If we're getting fit, we know what the things we need to do, but we really like that sweet donut that's in front of us, right? So it's the decision between the desire or discipline. Which one would we choose? Now, just FYI, just so you know that when I'm preaching here, I am preaching to myself as well. I'm not a person who's got all of these under control either, right? There's areas in my life that I am working towards in discipline as well. So coming back to the passage that we're just going to tease out this passage a little bit so we can understand it a bit more in detail. Now, to be a disciple, in the word disciple, there is discipline, okay? It's derived from that. So for you to be a disciple of Jesus, you need to live a disciplined life. Now, some of you here, or most of you here, may know about spiritual disciplines, right? For those who've done Grow, or if you've been a Christian a while, you know the spiritual disciplines, which is like prayer, Bible reading, fasting, giving, serving, evangelism. There's worship. All of these things are spiritual disciplines. They're called spiritual disciplines. Now, Jesus is the perfect example for a disciplined life. How many times have we read in the Bible, he woke up early in the morning, he spent time with God, right? He was setting a perfect example for us. He took human form, he was here, so he had the same battles as us. Waking up in the morning would have been hard, to set time aside when you've got a lot of serving happening, like he had people, coming to him to be prayed for and healed and all of that. So in that, he chose to be disciplined so he can spend time with his eternal Father. And there's many people in the Bible that we can read who were disciplined in their life. So let's look at this verse. The first part of it says, don't you realize that in a race, everyone runs? So we all know there's a lot of people, if you go in a marathon or any race, there's lots of people that run. But there's only few that win. So Paul here talks about life is like a race and we're all participating in it, but only a few finish well, right? For us to finish well, discipline is what separates the people who just run and who run with purpose. And that's what Paul's talking to us here. And then he goes on to say that all athletes are disciplined. Now, I think we know enough about athletes, right? We see plenty on TV, all the Olympics, and a lot of it, we know the context, the amount of training that goes into it. So I don't think we need to go too much into detail about that. But I read this about Michael Jordan. I think the youth would be all happy about that. The basketballer, he in high school was cut from his university basketball team, right? But instead of quitting, he trained relentlessly. That meant waking up early, practicing every day, pushing himself when no one was watching. And then later on, this is a statement that he said. He said, I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot, and I have missed. I have failed over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. Right? Sometimes when the going gets hard, we give up. It's very hard to stay disciplined, right? Or, stay on course. Like if you've had a few losses in your life, if you've had a few fails, we're like, no, I'm not doing that anymore. Like I have tried studying, I've joined this course, it's too hard, I'm going to give up. It's so easy to give up. But, I just used his example. But what, from his example even, you can see is discipline happens in private, but your harvest will happen in public, right? So sometimes those hard things that we have to do, no one sees us. The times that you spent in tears at night, praying for your children, for your generation, no one's going to see that. But one day will come when those children serve God and, the other people are blessed around them and gives glory to God, right? I just want to say to the parents out here this morning, I and my brother, we are a testament to that. And I don't know, every time I'm here, I'm probably saying the same thing. My mum is a woman of prayer. She all the time would spend time, she would do her cooking and then she would spend time. So I'll always have this picture of her sitting on the floor on her knees interceding for us. And she always used to say, I don't care that you become, the big positions in this world, but I want both my children to serve God. And as you can see, we are both serving God here. And I just want to encourage each and every parent here. It doesn't matter about all the accolades they get and all the other things that, it's important to provide training for them in their strengths, and that's great. But if you spend time praying for your child continuously, consistently, with perseverance, sometimes they will have their off days. Some days they will be rebellious, but that is okay because you've entrusted your child to the Almighty God, right? Even when those hard days come, we say, God, you're in control, right? There's lots of situations that's happened in my life, and when there's, sometimes we have to have difficult conversation or something. I'm like, God, I can't do this on my own. I just need your grace because I know I can do all things to Christ who strengthens me. That's a verse that I cling on with my dear life, especially at work. I have it in my office stuck. And I don't care what people think when they come into my office and read a Bible verse, but I have there because I need to look at that verse a little in a while to see, and that my strength comes from God, Jesus, through whom I have strength. Sometimes we even read that verse in a different way. I can do all things. Well, let me tell you, the importance not in me doing all things, the importance is in through Christ, right? So I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So, sorry, I've gone off topic a little bit. Coming back, then he talks about training for a price. And he talks about, in the verse he talks about, they do it to win a prize that will fade away, but we do it for an eternal price. So the things that we do in our spiritual disciplines, you know how hard fasting is, right? We don't because our body really wants the food. But we are doing this for an eternal prize. Not just like the athletes, they are doing it for trophies or medals, but we are doing it so that we gain an eternal prize. And God's will, so that our life is aligned with God's will and He will bless us with that spiritual growth. Then he talks about running with a purpose. Sometimes we just run aimlessly and, without focus. We're just running. And sometimes that can look like our friend Martha, right? She was doing a whole lot of things, but she missed what the priority was. And we can get so busy in doing lots of things. But the thing here comes down to our priorities as well. And further on, he talks in there about, I'm not shadow boxing. Like, I don't know, I'm not, into the boxing sport or anything, but I sure know that shadow boxing is a whole lot of boxing into nothing, right? And that we've been learning in Connect about who our enemy is, right? We know what we need to put on, right, in this race to win. We need the armor of God. We just can't shadow box randomly. We have a purpose, we have a plan, and God's will works in our lives, right? So we just can't shadow box. We don't have time for that. And Pastor Lee, when he's always here, he says, we are on a race. We go from victory to victory, but we also need to know who our enemy is. It's definitely not the people around us, right? So when an athlete, they do shadow boxing, they fight against an imaginary opponent. Now, discipline requires effort, intentionality, and honesty. Then he talks about disciplining our body. I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should do. I don't know, that's a pretty tough one. Training our body, right? Everything in our body is crying for the desires of the flesh, right? We, a little bit more watching of whatever, a little bit more eating of whatever, a little bit more hearing of the gossip. We just, our body just tends to enjoy that. And this is kind of counterculture or against what that is. And in Galatians chapter 5, verse 16, it says, "So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh." Right? Our flesh always, or our body always desires for the things of the flesh. But we need to walk in the Spirit so we can do that. Now, we know disciplining our body, and I'm talking about something I'm not comfortable with either, and exposing myself here. Exercise, right? Physical exercise for our body. Mentally bringing our thoughts into control, right? That's a very hard thing to do, because you can just sit here, and maybe some of you are doing it while you're listening to me. You could sit here, be looking at me, and your ears are here, but your thoughts could be going all over Ballarat, Melbourne, I don't know, anywhere, right? The thoughts are so easy to just go anywhere and everywhere. But it's so hard to bring our thoughts under the control of Jesus, right? But that's what's in the Word, to bring all our thoughts to the feet of Jesus, right? There are so many things that go through our head. There's anxieties, there's fears, things that make us uncomfortable. But will we make a decision to bring those thoughts into God's control? And then lastly, he talks about in that verse about being disqualified. And he worries that, after preaching all of this, I don't want to be disqualified. And sometimes we think, oh, this is only for preachers. No, if you've been preaching that, you better be doing it. We're actually, not that different. We are all good at giving opinions, right? How many of us have always given advice, but it's sometimes so hard to follow it ourselves? It's talking to even us that when we give advice, make sure that we're able to do it. Now, I'm going to share a couple of verses from the Word about discipline. Now, when I talk about discipline here, I'm talking about self-discipline, disciplining ourselves. Another word for that in the Bible would be self-control, right? Now, in Proverbs 25, verse 28, it says, "A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls." There's no protection, right? If you don't have self-control, you're going to put your hands into anything and everything, and then you'll end up in hot water. So, being disciplined, and I found this in research, and I thought it was very interesting. A person starting to form a disciplined life starts creating new neural pathways in their brain. How amazing is that, right? Things that we do, we start, and when we continuously do it and in a routine, it starts creating new neural pathways. So here it talks about, and let's go to we're going to, actually don't hold up on sharing the next verse, because we're going to do this together. Now, self-control is the fruit of the Spirit. We're going to go have a go at saying the fruits of the Spirit together. I know some of us we may not know it, and that's okay, but I know some of us here should know it. So, what are the fruits of the Spirit? It is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Awesome, guys. Well done. So this is in Galatians chapter 5, verse 22 to 23. The youth are very happy because that was their verse for this morning. So they all learnt it. That's why they confidently said it out loud. And also in the Bible, we see for the Spirit God has given us is not the spirit, is a spirit of power, love, and self-discipline. It's not of timidity, right? So if we look at all these verses combined, God has helped us. The Holy Spirit has given us these things, but we just need to access it and actually implement it in our lives. Now this is a bit of a tough one, right? I'm going to look, so we have good desires, we know what to do, so then why do we sleep up? right? We know what the right thing is to do. So the number one reason is laziness. Don't throw stones at me yet. Laziness, we're like, I'm not lazy, I've got so much to do. But if you expand on the time and stuff, how much you're spending on everything, you'll see if there's any laziness in your life or not. Whether it be spiritual or physical, sometimes we say, I'll pray tomorrow. I'll start that thing next week. I'll apologize to that person later. We kind of keep delaying things. And sometimes it's because of the fear of failure. Sometimes it's just because we don't want to confront it or deal with it, right? Snoozing an alarm instead of waking up to pray. Knowing, watching, any of you who have binge-watched stuff? Oh, come on, people. No, we're all holy people who've never binge-watched. I have. And before you know it, the times is gone, right? And you had to wake up the next morning, early in the morning, be at a place, do things. But it's so easy done, right? Proverbs 20 verse 4 says, those too lazy to plough in the right season will have no food at the harvest. That's a bit hard, right? So I know the youth at the moment are doing a series on time management. I love how all this kind of connects, right? Here it talks about if you're lazy to do the right thing at the right time, it's hard to find a harvest, right? In Proverbs 13 verse 4 says, lazy people want much, but get little, but those who work hard will prosper. There's lots of verses in Proverbs about this. The second reason that we often fail is because of busyness, right? We are so busy. We've got so many things going. We've got to do the kids, run around town with them. Sometimes, and there's things that we have to do, and I'm not discounting that. But there are things that we just do, and we stay so busy, but they are not the priority, right? So our busyness without direction is just chaos with a schedule. You can still have I'm one of those people who love lists, right? I write down everything I've got to do, but if I looked at my list, what are things in it only I can do, right? So say vacuuming the floor, it's not only me who can do it, right? There's other people in my house who could vacuum the floor. But being a parent or being a mum to my children, only I can do that, right? Listening to them, lots of nodding there. Yeah, I can see you. We sometimes are so busy with stuff. We've filled our calendars with stuff. But what is the priority, right? What, are the things that you just wrote down, are they in your schedule, right? The things that you are praying for a harvest, did they make it to your schedule? Let's, have a reflective moment. What are things that I need to prioritize so I can see this harvest? How many of us have trouble saying no? Yeah, right? We do. So what happens? We just pile on more stuff onto our schedule because, again, we don't want to offend anybody by saying no, but we know we're drowning with stuff in our schedule, right? So I just want to share something. So this is from a book called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. He writes about time management, and he has this little grid. Right, so the grid here has got important, urgent, not important. So, if we were to do this, now this is not from a business perspective, so I've just copy-pasted his slide as it is, but he's written stuff in there from a business perspective. But let's apply this for our lives. There are things in our life that are important, like, spending time with your family, right? There's, things that are urgently need to be done, right? So say you got a fine for speeding, right? If you're going to just sit on it and say, well, it is kind of important but not urgent, you're going to get another one, and then you will definitely have to pay more, right? So there's things in there that if you were to just categorize into your life and say, okay, this is urgent, only I can do it. But there are things, that other people around me can help. There's some urgent stuff, not urgent stuff, and they've got some examples there. But I'm not going to go into too much detail of that. But sometimes it's very hard to stay disciplined when our lives are so busy. So can I encourage you this morning, when you go back home, write down all the busy stuff you do. And go back to that thing that you're really praying for a harvest and see, can you add things in there where that becomes part of your discipline? Because if we don't discipline our lives, we are not going to see a harvest. Just the desire and the prayer is important, but we work with the things that we have to do as well. Now, the next reason often why we fail is because we like comfort. We like, I call it the battle of the blankets in the morning, right? I really want to get up and read the word, but these cold mornings when I could just stay back in bed and not get up. But then what happens is, then there's a chaos in the morning. I really want to read the Bible, but I've, slept in, or I don't have time now. I've got to make lunches. I've got to run around the house. They say that how you spend your first hour in the morning matters, and that sets you up for the rest of your day. Now, is God going to be in that first hour of your day? That's your choice, right? We talk about priorities. And I know some of us are late readers and, you prefer to stay late and read the Bible or whatever. But there is something about you giving your first hour to God, right? And saying, God, you're my first priority. I'm going to give the first hour. And an hour sounds a lot, even if it is half an hour. Or let's bring the bar down. It's like Abraham, saying to God, I'm going to bring the bar low. 15 minutes, right? We can do 15 minutes, right? And as we are here this morning, I want you to start thinking, what are things, what are steps, what are routines that I can do in my life? It might mean that you need to turn the alarm 30 minutes earlier from what you're doing it now, right? That's just a simple step. But, sometimes we get too comfortable and we know what we need to do, but we just can't because of the comfort we are in. When comfort whispers ease, your calling says more. You need to spend time more. You need to give God that time that's dedicated for him. And the next reason often that we fail is because we are emotionally driven. We have this emotional driven life where we say, I'm not feeling like it today. I don't want to do it because I just don't feel like it, right? We often go through emotions and we say, today's not a good day for it. I just can't do it. We bring all these excuses. Right, I know that was a bit of a hard one, the reasons why we slip, but it's important for us to have a bit of a reflection into our lives and see where are we going wrong and is there things that we can do better. Now we're going to look at what are some things we can do and what is discipline. What's that going to look like this is where the rubber hits the road. Up until now, we have learned everything about a harvest, what we need, where do we need to be positioned, everything. But today, we're going to make some steps where we are going to start putting it into practice, right? The first thing is, discipline is stewarding our God-given resources. Do you agree with that? God has blessed us with our physical strength, our time, our money. He's blessed us all with stuff, right? With talents. There's nobody here without any talent. God's blessed us all with it. All of us here have the same 24 hours. But how we spend it is what makes the difference. So if God gives you an income, and then you've got to think, am I really stewarding that well? I really want to buy a house, but when I go to the shopping mall, my impulse buying gets the better of me. and I can't really achieve my harvest, which is the dream of having a house. I really want to, do this course, but there's things that, I just don't want to spend time. I don't, those priorities, it's about stewarding what God has given us, right? The finances, how are you stewarding your finances, right? I'm not, please don't get this wrong, or that I'm against spending. We absolutely need to spend what is needed, but I'm talking about impulse buying here. Like, you see something, that was $700, so it's on a sale now. I really don't need it, but the sale difference looks awesome, so I'll just get it. Sometimes we do these impulse buying, and that's just one part of it. But what about your time, right? God has given all of us the same time, but how are we stewarding our time? It's so easy to just scroll and not, spend when we're supposed to spend time in the Word. Now, the Bible repeatedly calls us to be wise and have faithful oversight than ownership. When we look at the parable of the talents, the servants were held accountable on how they managed the talent. God has given us all resources, and it is important to look at how we are stewarding them. In the Bible, in 1 Corinthians 4 verse 2, it says, "Now it is required that those who have been given a trust, more must prove faithful." Are you faithful in the things that God has given you? Whether it be your children, God has given them, they're a blessing in our lives, but how are we training them, right? All of these things do form part of our discipline. Discipline is faithfulness in action, right? When we get into it, when we start doing stuff, that is discipline. Now, second one, discipline is training and not trying. Now, in the verse in Corinthians, we read that it says, "I discipline my body like an athlete, training to do what I should do." Often, training is just emotional. Trying is emotional, training is intentional. When someone says, "I am going to try and do that," we know that they have no thing of doing it. They have no plan of doing it. When I've used that, I don't do it anymore. If people, if you know people and they've come home and say, "Oh, next time when you're visiting Sydney, make sure you come home." We know that we're never going to go there. And we'll say, "Oh, I'll try." But we know that's probably never going to happen. I've stopped doing that because once a pastor or a mentor of mine told me off and said, "You're basically lying, right? When you say trying, you have no plans of doing it." So now I say, actually, if there is an opportunity and if we come by and things work, we may. But I'm not giving any promises, right? So trying never changes anything for long, whereas training changes our mindset. It's a different mindset. You are going in there with a plan. It's not like, "Oh, I'll try to do that." As soon as we say that, we're already giving ourselves a little bit of a room for excuses. I'm going to try. Whereas if I'm going to say, "I'm going to train to do that," that is a different, even in how we say it is different, right? When you're trying, you give up when it gets too hard. But when you're training, you don't act according to your feelings, you act according to your commitment. We know our kids all join things, right? And they are in training for that. Even if we don't feel like it, we drive up, even if it's in our pajamas, we drive them to that training. Why? Because we know the importance. And that commitment is important. They are not trying for that sport, they are training for a sport. And there is an outcome that we are hoping from it. So, if there's, if we all have things that we'll say, "Oh, we'll try and get to it." Sometimes there's clothes that pile up and we'll think, "Oh, I'll try and get it." Unfinished things in our house, we'll say, "I'll try and get it done." Well, that day is never going to come. If you say, "I'm going to," you can phrase it however you like, "I'm going to get this done," and you have a purpose and a time frame for it, then you are going to get that done, right? So if you're trying, you just show up hoping for a better result. But when you are in training, you have a game plan. You are going in with some fire in you, right? We just don't go and just try for things. We train for it. Now, the next thing is discipline requires consistency and perseverance. This is a hard one because we all are good at starting things, but consistently doing it and persevering through it is a hard one. Sometimes we say, okay, I'll start praying. And I'll do it for a couple of days. And then something comes up and I'm like, I can't do it, right? Or we just easily give up. But that, in that, then our spiritual discipline, it all falls down. So in Galatians, which is the verse that we've been hearing for the last few weeks, it says, let us not grow weary in doing good. God knows that we are going to grow weary, but what is our plan, right? We are going to grow weary, but we need to have a plan when that happens as well. Now, spiritual growth comes from habitual, ongoing practices. We need to be consistent. And in Romans chapter 5, verse 3 and 4, it talks about, suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character. And sometimes we need to sit and go through that process so it builds up character in us. Now, let me share a story. There was this one man. He was at his training for jiu-jitsu. Again, that's like a martial art, I think it is. And so he and the trainer and the person were having a conversation. And the trainer goes, do you know what the hardest belt is to attain? And of course, the guy goes and says, well, of course, it's the black belt. And the trainer goes, it's actually not. The white belt is the hardest because not a lot of people even try to get there. So, they give up before they even get to that phase, or they have plans of joining in, but it never happens. So most people never start. And then he goes on to say, so what is a black belt? And the guy says, well, that's when you run from a guy with a black belt. And he said, actually, it's not that. It's a person with a white belt who stayed consistent is a black belt, right? So to be able to attain something and, have things in our life, we need to be consistent. Now, often we start, we say, okay, I'm going to wake up at 6 o'clock. I'm going to read the word. And we do that. And then holidays come. And then it goes down, right? Miss one day and that's okay. But make sure you don't miss 2 days in a row. If we can even start with those little things, make time somewhere in your day where you can find time for that. We know this is a science thing, Thomas Alva Edison, where he found the light bulb. He had to go through 1,000 failed experiments before success was found. Imagine if he gave up after that 1,000 experiments. Well, he did well to go through 1,000. We can't even go through 5. If 5 times we failed at something, we're like, no, that's not for me. But we wouldn't have these globes, would we? Right? So that guy, he had to persevere through his failure to actually be able to achieve what he wanted. Now, the next thing is discipline requires reliance on the Holy Spirit. Often a lot of the things, we try and do it on our own, and we fail. We can't do this. Motivation is great, and we can start something with the motivation we have, but that won't sustain us. Discipline is what sustains us, but in that, we need God with us. In Galatians, it talks about the self-control being a fruit of the Spirit, sometimes we just need to rely on the Holy Spirit. So discipline without the Spirit just becomes legalism, whereas discipline with the Spirit becomes transformation. When we ask the Holy Spirit to guide us and lead us, He helps us through it. And the last one, and if I can get the worship team up, please. Discipline sometimes can be unpleasant. And we know when we have to follow things, it's very hard and lots of things will come. And the enemy is going to try and put things in your place to make sure you don't go ahead with the plan, because he knows if you do follow this, there is a harvest at the end which he does not want to happen in your life, right? So there's an enemy that you've got to battle as well. But this morning, There's also a verse in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 11. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace. And this passage is specifically talking to, God disciplining us. But even in our context, to stay disciplined in anything, whether it be, relational things, you want a strong marriage, but you don't just finding time to spend time together is so hard. And I'm not saying that is an unpleasant thing, but there's things that will be unpleasant in our lives, but we need to persevere through that. I'm going to just quickly give you 4 things that I just want to talk about. When things happen, we need to have a vision. Where are we going? What is your why behind the thing that you wrote down, right? The second thing is plan your routine. What does that look like? I want to get up in the morning and pray, but what does that look like in our everyday life? The third thing is plan for your failure, because often we are going to fail. When you go on holidays, when you're not able to meet your routine, what is your plan? When you have lots of, if you are trying to stay fit and you're going to a party, what is your plan? Like, all these things have a plan. And the fourth thing, which I have found works really good, is find an accountability partner. Someone to pray with, someone to hold you accountable. Now, in your family, it can be your husband and wife. You can decide between the two of you. It might be someone in church. These are some very practical things that you can implement. Now, as we draw this to a close, if we can all stand up in God's presence, there are things in our life we've been trying to do with our own strength. And we have tried and tried and tried, but we just couldn't keep up. This morning, you're going to submit yourselves to God and say, God, I've tried this on my own. But this morning, we're going to speak Jesus into that situation. We've tried to take our thoughts into control and discipline our thoughts. When those anxiety and thoughts of anxiety come, I'm like, no, not going to think. But sometimes we've just failed. This morning, we need Jesus into those areas of our life where we are praying for a harvest.